Today is a double celebration, so said my husband, standing in the middle of a garden bathed in warm light, decorated with such taste and care that for a moment I felt like the heroine of a romantic film, where everything ends with a kiss and eternal happiness. Mom is moving in with us, he announced with a solemnity that seemed inappropriate, almost mocking, especially in the context of our anniversary, when, it would seem, all the words should concern only the two of us, our love, our history, our 17 years spent together. I looked at him, and everything in me froze. Julia, his mother, stood next to her, holding a thin glass of champagne and radiating that nasty self-satisfaction that has always been her favorite mask. "You will adapt." "I always do," she said, bowing her head and looking straight at me with her cold eyes, in which there was not a drop of sympathy, not an ounce of doubt, only silent triumph. But her smile disappeared at the very second when I smiled too, slowly, calmly, as if my hands weren't shaking and my ears weren't buzzing with anger, and I pulled a document out of my purse, carefully unfolded it and said, "Well, me too." And before we continue, write in the comments what city you're watching this video from. Enjoy. That's where it all started. I don't even know where to start, because everything still stands before my eyes like a thick fog, the faces of the guests, the frozen smiles, the flash of the camera, Carlos's trembling lips, Julia's gaze filled with sudden incomprehension and fear. I'm still trying to comprehend what happened. But I need to say it. So, here it is. My name is Rosa. I've been married to Carlos for 17 years, and we live in Miami, in a house that I bought. Yes, I was the one, not the one. The house that rang with the laughter of our children and smelled of my spices and my coffee in the morning was mine because I put everything into it: money, energy, dreams. Carlos helped a little, but from the beginning it was all on me. My father, a man with a stern voice and a tender heart, left me some money when he died, and I invested it wisely, in school, in work, in investments, and then in this house. And I insisted that the house be registered only in my name, not because I didn't trust Carlos. At the time I thought he was my man, forever, but because I wanted to have at least one guarantee that I would have a place where I could be myself. Our marriage was not perfect. Who has perfect ones? But I believe that love can endure a lot. There were fights, there were reconciliations, there were periods of silence, there were nights when we held hands in the dark and thought that everything would work out. And yet I couldn't have predicted that he would do such a thing. I think I closed my eyes for too long. And then there she was. Julia. Oh, if you only knew how difficult it is to describe Julia. Not because I'm at a loss for words, but because every word seems either too soft or too cruel to convey her true nature. She is a master of psychological attack with veiled phrases, covered with concern. She was always criticizing me, but she did it as if she cared. "Oh, Rosa, I'm just worried that Carlos doesn't get a home-cooked meal every night, but I understand that not all women are made for the kitchen." Or, "Your skin looks dry, dear. You wash your face, don't you?" And then she would add, casually, "Did you get a promotion? That's nice. Carlos deserves one too, but you know, the corporate world is so unfair these days." I learned not to react. I nodded, I smiled, I thanked her, I didn't let her into my inner world. But I think that's what angered her most. I didn't give her the reaction she wanted, didn't argue, didn't make excuses, and that made her desire to hurt me all the more sophisticated. Carlos? He just watched. "That's just her, baby," he'd say. "She doesn't mean it. You know how moms are." No, I didn't know. My mom was different. Smart, reserved, strong. She taught me to be patient, but not blind. And I put up with Julia for him. For us. And then our anniversary came. Carlos threw it all out there, as if to make up for months of distance, weird phone calls with my mother, quiet dinners where he stared at the screen instead of at me. I decided to let it be. Maybe he was finally realizing how much I'd invested in this union. The garden was decorated with strings of lights, the air was filled with the aroma of freshly cooked food, and live music was playing. I was wearing a white dress, slightly reminiscent of a wedding dress, and I felt my heart finally letting go. We can start over, I thought. And then he tapped his glass. "Everyone, can you please pay attention to me?" I smiled, thinking he was about to say something touching. I was wrong. Tonight is special not only because it's our anniversary, but because we have another reason to celebrate. My mother is moving in with us. Forever. I felt my heart clench. People were cheering. Some gasped. Someone shouted, "This is amazing," as if they were hearing not an invasion of privacy, but an addition to the young family or a lottery win. I couldn't move, as if my whole body had turned to cold stone, except for my heart, which was beating so furiously that it seemed like its pounding would be heard by everyone. And then Julia, who was standing next to him with a glass of champagne, stepped forward, lifting her chin, her lips curling into that same mocking smirk that I had come to know every bit of over the years of marriage. "Oh, and Rosa, we're going to make some changes, starting with your bedroom. It'll be better for me. You understand," she said, winking, as if we were at a table of girlfriends in a cafe, discussing interior details and not my personal territory, my sanctuary, my right. She winked as if it were a joke, as if it were funny. I turned to Carlos, trying not to let my face distort, trying to catch in his eyes even a glimmer of doubt, remorse, even a drop of the man I was marrying. I waited for him to say something, to say that this was some kind of bad joke, inappropriate, stupid, that everything he said was the result of bad humor. But he just smiled at me, as if this really was the best idea in the world, as if I should now happily hug Julia and choose new curtains for the bedroom she was about to move into. He knew. He had planned it behind my back. I stood there, holding a glass of champagne in my hand, feeling the looks burning into my skin, the way people, not knowing the whole story, continued to smile, pretending that this was sweet, that this was a family idol. Friends, family, colleagues, everyone was waiting for me to react, to smile, to accept it like a decent wife, like a convenient woman who could be manipulated. But they didn't know that I had a surprise too. I sipped my champagne slowly, letting the bubbles fizz on my tongue, and set the glass down on the nearest tray with the calm that only people who have made a decision possess. I could feel my heart beating in my ears, as if the world had shrunk to just my pulse and my breath. I glanced at Carlos, then at Julia. Neither of them looked nervous, because in their heads it was all already decided, planned out by day, by step, perhaps with an expense spreadsheet and a shopping list. They assumed I would say yes. They assumed I would just take whatever they threw at me, because I was always calm, always composed. I forced a smile. "Wow," I said, trying to keep my voice even, devoid of the emotion that bubbled under my skin. Julia beamed. "I know, but it just makes sense, honey. You work so much, and I can help around the house. I might even teach you a few tricks in the kitchen," she said in that tone that always sounded like an invitation but was a death sentence. Some of them actually laughed, some even clapped their hands, like it was a funny family moment from a sitcom. I could barely hear them over the ringing in my ears. Carlos stood next to her, pleased, as if he had just made a good deal. He was planning to let his mother take over my house. And he did it in front of everyone, because he knew I wouldn't make a scene. He hoped so. But he didn't know, and none of them knew, that I already had a plan of my own. I hadn't trusted Carlos for a long time. He had been acting suspicious, distant, for months. Every time I walked into the room, he would abruptly put down the phone, an awkward stiffness in his movements, as if he were catching himself in the act of something forbidden. Conversations with his mother would end abruptly when I got close, and Carlos's eyes would dart around, as if he were trying to figure out a way out of a situation he'd created. Then, 2 weeks before the party, something happened that made everything fall into place. He'd left his laptop open. He never does that. He's paranoid about his devices, password protecting them, locking the screen even in the bathroom. But that day, he was in a hurry. He said he was going to an important meeting, and I knew it was just another drink with friends. I walked into the office to print out a receipt, and there it was. The laptop screen was lit up, the email open. The subject line, "Final move-in date confirmed." My stomach dropped. I clicked on the email. And there it was, the entire plan. Cold, logical, thought out to the last detail, I'll break the news at the party so she doesn't have to freak out in front of everyone. She'll get over it once she sees how much easier it will be to live here with you. I've already started moving some of her things into the guest room. I'll rearrange the furniture in the master bedroom next weekend. Once she accepts that, we can talk about her adding me to the deed of the house." I read the last line 3 times. My body was shaking, my fingers were ice cold, and everything inside me was screaming. Julia wasn't just moving. They were going to take my home from me. The place I'd built, preserved, and decorated. Carlos thought I'd just accept it. Smile. Cringe. Sign. I closed my laptop, grabbed my purse, and drove straight to my lawyer's office, silently, with the expression on my face that I only wear in the most decisive moments. And now, back at the party, I stood there, looking at the guests, who were still looking at me, still waiting for my reaction, not knowing that it was about to come. I saw my best friend Christina, her eyes wide open, shaking her head slightly, as if she were silently, with her whole appearance, with her whole being, telling me to breathe, not to panic, not to give them the spectacle they were probably counting on. I saw my brother Ricardo, frowning, his face darkening, a shadow of anger crossing it, and he took a step forward, ready, if necessary, to stand between Carlos and me, as if he sensed that there was more to this than just a marital conflict. I saw Julia, self-satisfied, serene, already moving confidently around the room, as if she had long ago inhabited this space, as if the walls, the floor, and the air already belonged to her, and the thought of my presence here was simply a formality that she was about to get rid of. I caught my breath, feeling how my breath was slightly held in my chest, as if in this silence it had acquired weight, and smiled, not the tense, polite one, but a conscious, calm, almost bright one. "Actually," I said, reaching for my purse, trying not to rush, giving everyone present time to sense that something unexpected was about to happen. "I also have an announcement." The room became so quiet that you could hear how someone carefully placed a glass on the glass table, how the strings of a violin fell silent, how the guests held their breath. I unfolded the document in my hand, smoothed it out carefully, almost solemnly, and held it up for all to see, a white sheet of paper with an official stamp, a seal, a signature. "This house has been sold." Julia blinked as if something had gotten into her eye, but no, it was a glitch in her perfect confidence. Carlos's smile froze, as if a mask had frozen on his face. He blinked in confusion, his voice cracked, became high-pitched, uncertain. "What?" I turned to face him completely, not taking my eyes off him, so that he could see that every word I was about to say would be measured, deliberate, without fear and without turning back. "I sold it," I said slowly, clearly, deliberately, so that there was no chance for him to misunderstand. "I signed the papers 3 days ago. The deal is done. The new owner takes possession next week." Someone gasped. There was a muffled laugh as Christina snorted into her drink, her eyes glittering with amusement and shock. Julia's face twitched as if invisible claws had dug into it. "You're kidding," her voice became sharp, piercing, like glass scraping granite. I smiled wider, almost affectionately. "Nope." At that moment the doorbell rang, and my heart turned over in my chest, contracted and released, like a spring that had been building up tension for a long time. This was the moment I had been waiting for, not with joy, but with determination. The doorbell rang again, the sound echoing around the room, bouncing off the walls like a gong. Carlos's face contorted with confusion, his eyes darting from Julia to the door, to me, and back to the door. Julia blinked as if she had swallowed a lemon, her lips thin and white. As if on cue, the entire room fell into a deathly silence, broken only by the faint clink of a spoon falling onto a plate. I tilted my head slightly, as if surprised by their confusion. "Why don't you understand, dear?" I said to Carlos, who was still rooted to the spot. He didn't move. Julia clutched her champagne glass so tightly that I feared the stem would break and the glass would cut through her skin, but it remained intact. I had done it myself. I walked calmly across the room, each step in my heel sounding like a hammer hitting a nail, hammering the last plank into the lid of the life they were trying to force on me, and opened the door. There, standing in the doorway, was Bella Condi, the woman who now owned my house. Bella, who was in her 60s but carried herself with a grace and dignity that younger men would envy, with a straight back, a slender waist, her graying but neatly groomed hair pulled back into a bun, an elegant light suit and pearl earrings. She walked in with a polite smile, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, taking in faces, assessing moods, before settling on me. "Rose, it's so nice to see you again," she said, her voice soft but confident. I smiled back. "Bella, just in time." I turned to the room and, just for fun, let the silence hang a little longer while everyone tried to process who she was and what she was doing there. Then I dropped the bomb. "This is Bella. She's the new owner of this house." Dead silence. Carlos flinched back as if I'd slapped him and he was just now starting to feel the pain. Julia's jaw literally dropped. Yes, that's right. Her lips parted, her eyes widened, her gaze frozen. Somewhere behind her, Christina choked on her drink again. Bella nodded politely, as if at a business meeting. "It's nice to meet you all. Rosa and I finalized everything a few days ago, and I'll be moving in next week." Carlos lost his composure. "You sold the house," he yelled, stepping toward me, his eyes wild, as if he hoped to take it back by force. "Our house? Without telling me?" I laughed softly, shaking my head slightly. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we made big, life-changing decisions without even talking to each other." His face turned red, as if he'd been doused in boiling water. "Rosa, this is crazy. Where should we live?" He blurted out, and I just shrugged. "I don't know, Carlos. Maybe, with your mother?" Julia muttered, her body jerking as if she'd tripped on the spot. "No way." She screamed, raising her voice to a shriek. "I'm not some charity. I'm not going to be homeless." Her voice cracked like ice. "Oh, but you did a great job making me homeless, didn't you?" I raised an eyebrow, keeping my voice low, not moving, and that was enough to make her mouth open and close like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. The guests looked at each other, some wide-eyed, some smirking, awkward but unable to look away. Bella stepped forward, hesitant but determined. "I don't want to intrude," she said, "but Rosa explained to me that she needs a little time to move her things. However, if the two of you need some extra time to find a new place, I'd be happy to let you stay, for a reasonable fee." Carlos's head snapped toward her, and even the way he did it, clumsily, jerkily, as if he'd been pushed from the inside, showed how out of control he'd become. "Rent?" He repeated the word, as if it were not only foreign but offensive, as if it somehow belittled him, violated some unwritten law that the world should revolve around him. "Yes," Bella nodded calmly, still with that serene, professional smile. "I plan to live here, but I'm in no rush. If you and your mother need a few weeks at fair market value, I'm open to discussing it." I almost laughed, not because it was funny but because it was almost absurd to watch Carlos's jaw clench, his eyes dart to Julia, both of them simultaneously realizing that the control they'd counted on was gone like smoke, leaving them empty-handed and with the expressions of people who'd suddenly stopped getting coffee in the morning. He looked at Julia. She looked at him. I could see the gears turning in his head, calculating the balances in his accounts, the cash in his wallet, how much it would cost to pay for rent, how long they could maintain some kind of standard of living. And then the second twist happened, and it was the moment I'd been preparing for most carefully, with the same care you give someone when they pack their last suitcase for a new life. I turned to Bella and gave her the smile you give a winner on a podium. "Ah, that's it," I said sweetly, my voice almost musical. "I don't need time to move." Carlos froze, as if the blow had come from the side, unexpectedly and forcefully. Julia's head snapped towards me so quickly that for a second I seriously thought she was going to break her neck. "What?" Her voice was almost a whisper. Carlos's voice dropped to a hoarse roar. "What did you say?" I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms, and allowed myself to savor this moment, the moment when their entire scheme was falling apart before my eyes. "I already have a reservation. My new apartment is ready. My things are already packed." I glanced towards Christina, who, watching the scene in rapt silence, only smiled wryly. She knew. Only she knew, because I trusted only her. Julia grabbed Carlos's arm as if she needed support, something solid, but he couldn't give it to her. So, what does this mean? Carlos's voice was strained, sharp, like a string about to snap. I smiled wider, as if I'd been playing chess and had just checkmated the king. That means you two have 5 days to figure something out. Or you can start paying Bella rent. It's up to you. Bella nodded with that calm that comes with age and good lawyers. Of course, I'll need a deposit, she said, almost apologetically, as if she were offering a cake rather than putting an end to their hopes. Julia gasped so hard that for a moment I thought she might pass out. Carlos just looked at me, and for the first time in our 17 years, I saw fear in his eyes, real fear, sharp as a needle in the heart. The guests began to shift uncomfortably, as if they didn't know whether to stay and watch this carnage or slip away quietly before anyone noticed. Bella, like a true professional, calmly pulled out her phone and said in a businesslike tone, "If you want, I can draw up a lease right now." At that moment, Carlos lost his temper. "You can't do this to me, Rosa," he shouted, stepping toward me, his face flushed, the veins in his neck bulging, his lips twisted into an angry grimace. Julia, still holding his hand, shrieked, "This is your wife, Carlos. She should be supporting you, not betraying you like this." I let out a short, bitter laugh, not from amusement, but from bitter irony. "Betray you?" I repeated, looking straight at Julia. "You mean how the two of you plan to take over my house behind my back?" Carlos winced. Julia pursed her lips, her face flushed, and her entire body shook with a rage I knew she was barely containing. "You're being dramatic," she hissed, looking at me like I was a stage actress in the 5th act. "It worked," I repeated, loudly this time, so everyone in the room could hear. "That little line. Dramatic? You tried to steal my house. Carlos, you sent letters to your mother. You told her you were going to convince me to sign you up for the act. You started moving my stuff out without telling me." Julia gasped as if she'd been slapped. "Carlos, what did you do?" Her voice was different, not as sure as before. I turned to her, narrowing my eyes. "Oh, you didn't know? You thought you were just moving, but Carlos had bigger plans. He was going to make this house his. And then, who knows? Maybe push me out completely." Julia's head snapped around to face Carlos. "Tell her she's lying," she demanded, but her voice was shaking. Carlos's face went completely white, and he opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, and nothing. Silence hung over the room, heavy as a storm before lightning struck. The moment dragged on painfully long until realization dawned on Julia's face. "You," she began, shaking her head in disbelief, her voice sharp and piercing. "You weren't just going to let me live here. You were going to take over the house." Carlos swallowed hard. "Mom, he began, but he didn't have time to finish. "You're an idiot," she shrieked, and to my surprise, it sounded almost like betrayal. I raised an eyebrow at the shifting alliances, the way their union began to crumble. I expected her to defend him, to take his side, but Julia? Oh, no. She turned to him immediately, as if she'd forgotten about me, forgotten about the guests, forgotten about Bella. "You told me this was our plan," she hissed. "That once I moved in, we'd work together to clean up the mess." "Mama, listen." Carlos began, but the words were stuck in his throat, as if his tongue refused to obey him because everything that needed to be said was already obvious, too late. "You were going to write me off, too, weren't you?" Julia said, her voice shaking, not with anger but with a feeling that was new to her, a betrayal directed not outward but inward, towards her. Carlos's jaw clenched, his face went still, his eyes blank, and this silence, drawn out like a whip, was his answer, wordless but final. Julia took a step back, staring at her son as if she were really looking at him for the first time, at this grown man she had once held in her arms and now suddenly could not recognize. "You were going to use me," she whispered, her voice tight, as if something were squeezing her chest from within. The same way you used her. I watched it happen, as the realization that she was just a pawn to him, just like me, pierced her, breaking the armor of arrogant confidence that she had hidden behind for years. The betrayal hit her, and it showed in the way she suddenly sank. Her shoulders slumped, her face wrinkled, her breathing became ragged. Julia, the woman who had turned my life into an endless theater of petty humiliations for years, had just realized that she, too, was disposable. Carlos looked like he wanted to crawl out of his own skin, to leave this room, this evening, himself. I took a deep breath and straightened my dress, as if I were tidying up not just the fabric but my soul. Well, now that it's all out in the open, I think we're done, I said, quietly, without pathos, simply stating the fact. Julia looked at Carlos, then at me, her gaze no longer superior, only confused and hurt, as if she were the victim, although she had recently considered herself the winner. Then she turned abruptly, grabbed her purse, and, holding her head high, ran out, her heels tapping the floor like a drumbeat of retreat. Carlos stood completely frozen, not making the slightest movement, as if his whole body refused to react. People were whispering, some of the guests had already left, some froze, not knowing what to do, stay to hear the end, or leave, taking with them this unforgettable moment of awkward but vivid truth. Ricardo came up to me, his face calm, but his eyes were ready. "Do you need me to throw him out?" he asked reservedly. I thought about it. For a moment I imagined him grabbing Carlos by the collar and pushing him out the door. But then something changed in Carlos's face. I expected rage, or maybe an attempt to justify himself, to play the victim again, but what I saw was different: defeat. Pure, unfiltered defeat, the kind that only comes when a person no longer hopes to win. "Rose," he said, his voice low, barely audible. "Can we just talk, please?" The anger I'd been holding in for so long suddenly faltered, not gone, but less sharp. "Talk?" I asked, feeling not irritation but almost weariness rising inside me. He nodded quickly. "Just us, no one else." I exhaled slowly, then nodded. We walked out into the backyard, where there used to be parties, family dinners, children laughing and the smell of barbecue. Now everything was quiet. The music was turned off, the candles had burned out, the night was enveloping us in silence, as if nature itself was waiting for what was going to happen. Carlos ran his hand through his hair, ran his fingers over his temples a few times, as if he were trying to erase everything that had happened. "I fucked up," he said finally. I waited. Not because I wanted to hear more, but because I wanted to know if he realized it himself. "I don't even know what I thought," he exhaled, and it wasn't a sigh of relief, but defeat. "I thought I'd let you take advantage of me," he said flatly, without intonation, and then winced. "No, not really. I felt comfortable. You always handled everything. You always made everything work. And Mom," she kept pressuring me, telling me that I deserved more. That you had everything and I had nothing. And I started to believe it. I shook my head. "You had a marriage, a partnership. You could have talked to me. Instead, you plotted with your mother." My voice shook, but it was firm. "Do you even love me, Carlos?" He looked up sharply. And for the first time that night, I saw in his eyes not hurt, not anger, but real pain. "Of course I do," he said, almost desperately. "Rosa, I love you. I was selfish. I saw an opportunity and I took it. But I never wanted to hurt you. I thought it would get us to a better place." I let his words hang in the air between us. I didn't interrupt, didn't comment. And then I said what I'd known for weeks, if not months: "I don't love you anymore." Carlos flinched, as if it had been a physical blow. "Maybe I did once. Maybe if you'd apologized sooner, if you'd been honest, I would have believed you. But not anymore. And I don't trust you." His eyes filled with something close to panic. "Rosa," he began, but I was already standing. "I'll have my lawyer contact you. We'll figure out the details." He remained seated, staring at his hands, as if they held the answer. He didn't try to stop me, didn't stand up, didn't call after me. Because, deep down, he knew there was nothing left to save. A week later, I stood at the window of my new apartment, small but bright, overlooking the park where dogs walk and children run in the mornings, and watched Carlos and Julia pack the last of their things. Bella did not allow them to stay. She was polite but firm. A few days later, she had already found new tenants. Julia and Carlos moved into a tiny apartment, not at all like the house they had tried to take away from me. Christina brought a bottle of wine. We sat on my balcony, the wind fluttering the tablecloth, and the evening seemed surprisingly light. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass and smiling slyly. I clinked glasses with hers, looking at her eyes, full of support. "To finally putting myself first," I corrected, and as I took a sip, something in my chest released. For the first time in many years, I felt free. Write a comment what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.